Next on Brute Force, the history of weapons at war. They're the greyhounds of the sea, sleek and fast, with an incredible wartime record. They're the Navy's most versatile fighting ships. From convoy patrols in the North Atlantic, to the island-hopping campaigns of the Pacific, to the waters of the Persian Gulf. Today, they bristle with an awesome array of high-tech weaponry. Set sail with destroyers. Next on Brute Force, the history of weapons at war.
In the late 1800s, torpedo boats were introduced as a weapon in the arsenal of naval warfare. To combat this new threat, the British Navy built speedy ships called torpedo boat destroyers. From this single mission, destroyers quickly proved themselves in a variety of critical roles: air defense, mine-sweeping, and anti-submarine warfare.
Conning officer, based on a good fix, time 1-5, hold you on track, distance remaining 880 yards, your next course at 270. Nearest hazard navigation is shoal water off the starboard bow at a distance of 350 yards. Depth of 16 feet beneath the dome, concurs with charted depth, recommend you maintain course and speed.
Since the first destroyer was built almost 100 years ago, they have proved to be the most versatile ship in the arsenals of the world's navies. Today's modern U.S. Navy destroyers are bigger and more powerful than ever, with extended capabilities that would not have been dreamt of by earlier destroyermen. The Kidd-class destroyer is a variation of the Spruance class, which makes up the backbone of the United States destroyer fleet. This is the USS Chandler, hull number 996. One of the 4 Kidd-class ships that were built for the Shah of Iran but were not delivered following the Iranian Revolution. Since the 4 Kidd-class destroyers were originally designed for general-purpose warfare, the Chandler is one of the most powerful ships at sea in terms of striking power.
Depending on the mission assigned to us, it could be something as simple as a presence mission, where we're directed to proceed to a foreign shore and just steam back and forth along the coast, just to kind of knock on the door and let the leaders of that country know that we're there. If it's a wartime kind of an environment, we can kick down the door.
Modern naval warfare most often means engaging the enemy long before they can be seen. To detect the enemy at these great distances, the destroyer is equipped with several types of radar, including air search to detect enemy aircraft and surface radar to locate hostile ships.
8431 and track 8432 inbound unopposed. Watching tracks 8431 and 32 over.
All of this information, plus data received from friendly ships and aircraft, is fed into this compartment located deep in the heart of the Chandler. Known as the Combat Information Center, or CIC, this is where the decisions on how and when to fight the ship are made.
The Tactical Action Officer receives inputs from all around Combat Information Center, this room around me. And maybe it's best easy to explain where the inputs come from. On my right-hand side, I get the anti-air warfare inputs, everything associated essentially that flies or operates in the airspace. And that information comes to me from the people that stand watch on that side of the room. On the other side of the room, I'll have the surface and subsurface inputs, whether it's acoustic or sonar type information comes in, or whether it's radar information of surface contacts in the area. And so all that information comes to me as a focal point in this position here. And then based on the threat, what's out there, we can respond to that.
8434 outbound, believe he may have split and dropped some inbound vampires. Watching track 8434.
Very tense. For different type of situations, if it's real crowded, a whole bunch of other ships, it can get serious down here.
We're all concentrating real hard on our job, what we're trying to get accomplished. Everybody's trying to stay alert, pay attention to what's going on, look for any safety violations. We don't want to shoot down the wrong thing.
If the danger comes from an unfriendly aircraft, the Chandler's Mark 26 missile launchers will be loaded with surface-to-air guided missiles capable of being launched at distant targets.
Look, I have wreck fire track 8432, permission to fire.
Wait, what?
Alpha Whiskey, this is Lima.
Enemy surface ships can be attacked using these tube-launched Harpoon surface-to-surface missiles. For shore bombardment or smaller vessels not worthy of the expenditure of a $750,000 missile, the Chandler is equipped with a pair of rapid-fire deck guns.
We have 2 5-inch guns on board this particular ship. Some ships have only 1 gun. It's a 5-inch gun. It has a range of approximately 10 to 12 miles, and it's capable of shooting down enemy aircraft and also engaging enemy surface craft. So that's the reason for the dual purpose of it. Additionally, it can be used for naval gunfire support, and if we have friendly forces on the beach, for example, conducting an amphibious landing of some kind, we could conduct shore bombardment prior to their arrival.
As a last line of defense, the ship is also equipped with a close-in weapons system comprised of 2 radar-guided Gatling guns. If a missile has slipped past the ship's outer perimeter of defenses, these guns will lock on to the target and blast it from the sky with a nearly solid stream of bullets.
Evaluator sonar hydrophone effects now bear 142.
While the radar watches the ocean's surface and the skies above it, the men in the sonar room are listening below the waves.
All stations, sonar has hydrophone effects bearing 147, classification torpedo. Recommend energizing Nixie and evading.
All stations, sonar has hydrophone effects bearing 141, classification hostile torpedo.
Contact now bears 144, 5,020 yards. 9.7 knots, opening Doppler.
The hull-mounted SQS-53 sonar can either listen passively or use an active pinging mode to locate enemy submarines. In addition to onboard sonar, the ship is also capable of carrying 2 helicopters that can relay information from sonobuoys.
Our goal would be to launch those helicopters, which are capable of dropping torpedoes themselves, and engage an enemy submarine at extended ranges well over the horizon, so that we ourselves are not in danger of being attacked. If for some reason that was not feasible, then we do have the capability with our own torpedo launchers to launch what is called an ASROC torpedo. It's an anti-submarine rocket torpedo, which can fire at moderate ranges, engage the enemy submarine probably beyond his firing range. And then if necessary, we have some what are called over-the-side torpedoes, which are similar to the torpedoes in World War II that shoot directly off the side of the ship at close in-range enemy contacts.
But all of this firepower will not be effective if you can't get it to where it is needed. The Chandler is capable of over 30 knots pushed forward by twin propellers that churn the sea into a whitewater rooster tail. The power to do this comes from 4 aircraft-type gas turbine engines with a combined output of 80,000 horsepower.
I look at it as kind of a sports car of the Navy. I would say it's kind of like a Corvette. It's a high-performance vehicle that can go fast, shoot fast, and it's a very capable platform. I think it's one of the more fun-type ships to be on, and I'm very glad to be here.
Okay, I have this rack made, and that rack made.
Life aboard a destroyer at sea starts before the sun rises. The first order of the day is to feed the 300 sailors and 25 officers that make up the crew.
Food is very important to morale. That's when you talk about pleasing the crew. It's very important that you put out a quality meal because it keeps up morale, you know. I feel as MS, my duty is to help boost morale, to keep morale high.
After breakfast, it will be drills, maintenance, and more drills, running until late at night.
Maintenance is 24 hours a day. If it could be 30 hours a day, it'd be 30 hours a day. It's an ongoing evolution. The sea environment is probably the worst environment you could have for a steel ship, and it's ongoing. It's never-ending evolution.
This is a fire drill, in which the crew must fight a simulated fire in the engine compartment of the ship. Whether in battle conditions or under normal sailing, fire can be the worst enemy on a ship loaded with fuel and munitions.
When you're out there at sea, you're all alone, you only got 563 feet long and you got 50-some-odd feet wide. There's nowhere to go. So you got to count on your own people to save the ship.
Lock leader!
Lock leader, aye.
I need fire boundary set. 174 forward, 220 aft.
Hey guys, evacuate space! Let me know what's going on!
Engineering Control receives information on the fire's whereabouts and status and makes all decisions on how the fire will be attacked.
Repair 5 Central. Light off field sprinkling for 2 minutes. Enter space.
Central, requesting maneuver to place the wind on the port beam.
Maneuver to place the wind on the port beam. Bridge eye. Repair electrician, locker leader. Set electrical isolation, MER1.
Electrical isolation, MER1 on.
We train to any type of emergencies. Therefore, if the emergency were to happen, we get people that respond basically like in second nature. They don't have to stop and think about what they're going to do. So, we got a fire. So they go in there and they respond and they go down the regular checklist. 1, 2, 3, 4. This is what we do if this happens.
Okay, in the pod house, we're entering an area where gas attack is imminent, so be prepared to take whatever actions are necessary. Gas! 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 What do you get your gas mask on?
In the event that we take some sort of a battle hit, we have to be able to keep the ship from burning, put out the fires, prevent flooding if possible, and enable the ship to continue on and to continue to fight. So that's a very difficult process, and so we constantly train over and over again in those skills that will enable us to get to the scene, to fight the ship, and to repair battle damage if we take any.
Effective damage control is essential to the safety of a ship and her crew, and can be the most important factor in determining whether a ship is sunk or goes on to fight another day.
Let's get repair 5. Understand, Halon appears to be effective.
Okay, secondary investigation, repair 2, no apparent damage.
My question is, well, I guess...
I don't know why you didn't go down there, but you want to stay up here to get protection when you got a dual level.
All right, sir.
Okay?
The modern destroyer is a sleek and powerful fighting ship. Designed to operate in multi-threat situations, ships like the Chandler are capable of countering air, surface, and subsurface threats. This versatility is descendant from the destroyer's long history of naval prowess.
Destroyers will continue in a moment here on A&E.
All modern destroyers can trace their history to this ship, the USS Bainbridge, United States' first destroyer. Launched in 1901, the Bainbridge was designed to counter the threat from the self-propelled torpedo and the small but effective torpedo boats that carried them. Able to slip in under the big guns of a battleship or cruiser and launch a torpedo, these small boats were a menace to capital ships. This threat brought about the development of the torpedo boat destroyer. Bigger and faster than a torpedo boat, and equipped with both deck guns and torpedoes of her own, these ships were soon to be known by their shortened name, destroyers.
The torpedo boat destroyer
was supposed to protect the big ships by attacking these smaller torpedo boats as they came in to attack the big ships. So here you get what I call measure versus countermeasure. You had the torpedo and torpedo boat, so the countermeasure was the torpedo boat destroyer.
By the outbreak of World War I, the destroyer had become a standard fixture in both the U.S. and British navies. The Battle of Jutland in 1916 was to be the first test of theories on destroyer tactics. In the tradition of the mighty naval flotilla, over 250 German and English warships met in the North Sea. Present in this force were 62 German torpedo boats and 80 British destroyers, setting the stage for a destroyer-torpedo boat duel. In the end, 24 ships from both sides had been sunk, but only 5 ships had been damaged by torpedoes. The battleships and cruisers had proven they were capable of defending themselves from daylight torpedo attacks, and in the confusion of darkness, the destroyers had little success with their own torpedo attacks. The Battle of Jutland changed the thinking of destroyer tactics, but it was the new German U-boat that added a new mission to the versatile destroyer.
World War I, you had the destroyer primarily defending the large ships, the battleships, battlecruisers, and if an opportunity came, to themselves go and attack the enemy's big ships with its own torpedoes. However, the development and use of U-boats, submarines by the Germans early in World War I, added anti-submarine warfare, or ASW, as a primary mission of destroyers.
Originally thought to be of little threat, the U-boat was soon wreaking havoc on British shipping. As ship after ship sunk in the crosshairs of the German periscopes, the destroyer became the weapon of choice in anti-submarine warfare.
It was found that the destroyer, because of its high speed and relatively long endurance, was an ideal craft to counter the submarine.
The United States entered the war in 1917 and immediately began sending destroyers to help break the stranglehold that German U-boats had on England. The destroyer-escorted convoy system was instituted, and almost immediately the U-boats began to lose ground in the Atlantic. These destroyers began developing the first true techniques of anti-submarine warfare.
Initially, destroyers simply looked for submarines, usually their periscope, and tried to ram them. Subsequently, a number of anti-submarine weapons were developed for destroyers, the most successful and popular one being the depth charge, or ash can.
It's a metal container full of explosive with a pressure-sensitive detonator, which could be preset to explode, cause a pressure wave underwater, over a submarine, under a submarine, or even actually in contact with the submarine. This system remained as the standard anti-submarine warfare system for 50 years after its development in the First World War.
The destroyer's chief value during World War I was that of a deterrent to U-boat attacks. Although U.S. destroyers sunk only one German sub during the war, they successfully guarded the transatlantic crossing of over 2 million soldiers without the loss of a single life.
If you can just keep a destroyer over the submarine and force him to stay down, to stay quiet, your convoy is going to move away, and although the destroyer may not have sunk that submarine, he certainly stopped him from interfering with the merchant ships or doing whatever he's trying to do.
By the end of World War I, the destroyer, or four-piper as she was nicknamed because of her distinctive four-stack profile, had added the job of anti-submarine warfare to her growing list of duties.
They kept their torpedo attack mission, they kept their defensive mission. So by the end of World War I, you had a destroyer which was doing 3 missions. And indeed, this led to destroyers being some of the most versatile warships ever conceived.
At the end of World War I, the United States mothballed the majority of her destroyer fleet, never imagining that in just over 20 years, they would once again be at war in the Atlantic.
Destroyers will continue in a moment here on A&E. In 1939, the Nazi blitzkrieg plunged Europe into World War II.
And once again, destroyers were racing to battle. On the 9th of April, 1940, 10 German destroyers captured the Norwegian port of Narvik in a surprise attack. Steaming to the rescue, a squadron of British destroyers caught the Nazis by surprise and sent the entire German force to the bottom of the fjord. This single naval engagement cut the Kriegsmarine destroyer force in half, greatly reducing the Nazi surface raider threat. While the United States maintained its neutrality, Britain was once again faced by an all-too-familiar enemy, the U-boat. Under the command of Admiral Karl Donitz, the submarines operated in mid-Atlantic wolf packs that were devastatingly effective.
Once a convoy was found, the U-boat that made the initial detection would not attack. He would trail the convoy, serve as a radio beacon to bring in the other submarines. Then they would all attack together to confuse the escorts.
The British Royal Navy, in desperate need of help, received 50 World War I vintage four-piper destroyers in a lease agreement with the United States. These destroyers were soon escorting convoys across the Atlantic in a desperate British supply line.
By 1940, it was obvious that there was a need to put merchant ships into protected groups known as convoys. All ships sailing between North America and the United Kingdom were put into convoys. This convoy system, which meant mutual protection, enabled submarines to be detected early and to be countermeasured.
Neutrality for the United States ended on December 7, 1941, the bombing of Pearl Harbor. U.S. destroyers that up until now had only been involved in harassing actions against the Germans now entered the Battle of the Atlantic in earnest. During the year of 1942, German U-boats had a field day destroying nearly 1,000 Allied ships in the Atlantic. But in 1943, several developments began to turn the tide on the wolf packs. Advanced radar that directly controlled the aiming of the guns along with improved sonar made it easier to detect submarines. But perhaps the biggest advancement came in the form of a new type of destroyer.
Beginning in 1943, we commissioned large numbers of DEs, or destroyer escorts, miniaturized destroyers. These ships had 5-inch guns or 3-inch, plus the 40s and 20s. But for ASW, anti-submarine warfare, in addition to depth charges, they carried Hedgehogs. Hedgehog was a marvelous ahead-firing weapon. The nice thing about the Hedgehog, it did not explode unless it actually hit a submarine. That meant if you missed the sub, you were still able to continue pinging or listening for them passively with hydrophones. So it was a much more effective ASW weapon.
Large numbers of destroyer escorts, or DEs, soon joined with destroyers accompanying convoys across the Atlantic. Groups of merchant vessels, often numbering in the hundreds, were placed in formations that were then surrounded by destroyers and destroyer escorts that maintained radar and sonar searches, in addition to constant visual surveillance.
You were looking out all the time. You know, you were just constantly looking out for submarines. You had to be alert. Your lookouts had to be alert. Sonar man had to be right on the ball. Just constantly alert. And you knew you had to protect those ships.
We saw the smoke of the convoys. And then we approached them closer till we saw the masts and the funnel. But never that close that we saw their bridge, because when we saw their bridge, they were able to see us too.
And when we made contact, one of the destroyers would go after them. If there was one sub, one destroyer would go after it. If there was two destroyer escorts would go after them. And we'd attack. We'd use Hedgehogs, which go over the bow, and then we'd continue on with depth charges.
And you can hear the splash of the depth charges when they hit the surface. And then we counted the seconds, and then you heard the explosion.
dead shortages is not a very nice feeling. Your boat is shaking, lights are breaking, and people are getting gray in their face.
Everybody's afraid, including the skipper. You cannot do a thing about it. You have, at that moment, you wished you were in the infantry or in the army.
In 1943, the Germans lost 237 submarines and began to refer to the DEs as the deadly little ships. For a German submarine crew, the only sight worse than a destroyer escort on attack was a pair of DEs working to double-team a U-boat.
You were using hydrophones or listening devices to detect the propeller and movement noises of the submarine. If the destroyer attacked the submarine with depth charges, it would totally distort the sound in the ocean. If you had two destroyers or three, while one or two were attacking, the other one would stand off and be able to keep some semblance of an acoustic picture, if you will, of what the environment was like and where the submarine was.
In a further effort to turn the tables on the marauding wolf packs, the Navy began joining destroyers with small escort aircraft carriers. These task forces made up of 5 or 6 destroyers, or DEs, and a carrier were known as the hunter-killer groups and roamed the Atlantic with a single-purpose mission: find and destroy German submarines.
Starting about 43, we were getting so much intelligence from the Enigma, the decryptions of German submarine communications, that we were able to send hunter-killer groups to specific locations to attack submarines.
These hunter-killer groups became so successful at blowing U-boats to the surface that the Navy came up with a bold plan.
What we heard was that they had discussed it, and Captain Gallery, who was head of the carrier, he briefed all of his commanders and said that we'd try to capture one.
On June 4th, 1944, a hunter-killer group composed of the carrier Guadalcanal and 5 destroyer escorts made contact with the German submarine U-505. The Chatelaine was ordered to engage the enemy.
We attacked her. We damaged her rudder. She started going in circles. We were following her on the outside in circles. She surfaced. We used only small arms, 20s, rifles, machine guns. We got in close. We kept them off the guns. We only killed one on that one. And they abandoned. They scuttled it. They opened their scuttle valves and they abandoned it.
To the surprise of the German sailors, boats were launched from the Chatelaine in Pillsbury, and boarding parties of American sailors had soon secured the submarine. The capture of the U-505 provided the Allies with invaluable intelligence and further signified an end to the Wolfpack domination of the Battle of the Atlantic.
You could go anywhere they wanted, when they wanted, and do what they wanted. They could sink any ship they wanted. And then when we came along, the destroyer escorts, it was a different story. Instead of being the hunters, they became the hunted.
Destroyers will continue in a moment here on A&E.
With the tide turning on the wolf packs in the North Atlantic, the destroyermen of the U.S. Navy began to turn more of their attention and resources to the Pacific. There they found the attackers came not from beneath the surface, but from overhead, from the decks of Japanese aircraft carriers.
December 7, 1941, the sleepy island of Oahu was just beginning to stir. The United States Pacific Fleet lay at anchor in Pearl Harbor, unaware the destroyer Ward, an old four-piper, was about to fire the first shot in the Pacific War. At 6:45 a.m., the Ward's gun crew opened fire on and subsequently sunk a Japanese sub at the entrance to the harbor. The Ward radioed headquarters of her action at 6:54 but her warning went unheeded, and at 7:55, the first wave of Japanese bombers struck. In this single attack, the Japanese decimated the Pacific Fleet. All 8 of the fleet's mighty battleships were sunk or severely damaged. But of the 29 destroyers in the harbor, 26 managed to escape. These destroyers and a handful of other ships that escaped destruction now had to take the fight to the Japanese. The Navy's newest Fletcher-class destroyer would once again demonstrate the destroyer's versatility in the island-hopping campaigns of the Pacific.
We saw the destroyers take on a new role, gunfire support for the amphibious landings. As the troops approached the beach in their landing craft or amphibious tractors, destroyers would just start blasting the beach to keep the enemy's heads down. Once the troops were ashore, the destroyers were often called upon to shoot at specific targets. A group of tanks moving down the road, a blockhouse, an observation tower. And although the destroyer guns could only shoot a few miles, within that range they were highly effective and very accurate.
With its shallow draft and the firepower of its 5 5-inch guns, the destroyers provided landing craft with close-in fire support.
On some of the pre-invasion stuff in Okinawa, we got in so close we were told to stay down behind something because snipers might get you. We were always underway. We never anchored for shore bombardment because somebody can nail you. Either aircraft or submarines or shore batteries. If you're sitting still, you make too easy of a target.
Bill Eaton was aboard the destroyer Longshaw when she ran aground while providing shore bombardment at Okinawa.
When the shore battery started, they had to zero it in, and they destroyed the ship in 5 to 10 minutes. So we got in the water, and the guy said, "Where are we going?" I pointed out the horizon. They said, "Out there." He said, "Where's that?" I said, "As far away as we can get."
The war in the Pacific provided the destroyer with some of its fiercest naval battles. At Guadalcanal, destroyers were instrumental in stopping the Tokyo Express, a Japanese supply line to the Solomon Islands.
Many of these engagements took place at night between U.S. destroyers and Japanese destroyers, which were trying to escort barges loaded with troops and equipment, or destroyers themselves carrying troops to reinforce the Japanese garrison on Guadalcanal. You had, in the several months of that campaign, at least a half dozen or more destroyer versus destroyer night engagements.
At Guadalcanal, the United States lost 24 ships, including 15 destroyers. But the Japanese advance across the Pacific had finally been stopped. The next test for the destroyers came at the Battle of Leyte Gulf, considered to be the greatest naval battle in history. The Japanese were intent on stopping the U.S. invasion of the Philippines and sent 4 fleets comprised of battleships, cruisers, and destroyers to smash the American invasion force. The first of the Japanese forces streamed into the Surigao Strait and into the jaws of a waiting trap. The trap sprung shut with 20 U.S. and Australian destroyers providing the fight and the big guns of 8 cruisers and 6 battleships to finish off the leftovers in a crushing victory. As the remainder of the bloodied southern Japanese fleet retreated, an undetected fleet of Japanese ships comprised of 4 battleships, 7 cruisers, and 11 destroyers steamed in from the north. All that stood between them and the U.S. invasion forces was Admiral Sprague's Northern Carrier Group.
The only ships with their escort carriers to screen them were several destroyers and destroyer escorts. So we suddenly had Japanese ships with 18.1-inch guns going against destroyers with 5-inch guns and DEs with 3-inch guns.
The hopelessly outgunned destroyers raced in against a fleet that included the giant 63,000-ton battleship Yamato. The odds were impossible, and the destroyers suffered great casualties, but the bravado of their attack was convincing.
Several of the destroyers and DEs were damaged, a couple were sunk, but the Japanese cruisers and destroyers, believing they had fallen in with a large carrier group where there would be many more aircraft and more capable aircraft than the Jeep carriers had, after engaging them, the Japanese ships did turn and flee.
With the Philippines secure, all that lay between the U.S. forces and Japan was the island of Okinawa. It was during this battle that the destroyers met their most formidable foe yet.
Kamikazes, in many respects, was the worst threat to destroyers during the war. These were the first real air-to-surface guided missiles, guided by a human being who had no desire to do anything with the rest of his life except to crash into an American warship.
It was downright terrifying. At Okinawa, we quite often had planes headed our way, which you always assumed at Okinawa there was suicide. There was very little of anything else other than suicide planes at Okinawa.
Manned by pilots with only the most basic of training, massive waves of these suicidal warriors roared down on the Okinawa invasion forces. To try and counter this threat, the Navy used destroyers to create an early warning system.
We put a ring of destroyers around the island to give early warning of Japanese air attacks so that the carriers and the amphibious forces could both defend themselves, the carriers launch additional fighters. The Japanese soon realized this and began concentrating the kamikaze attacks on the destroyers in order to knock out our early warning system.
These destroyers, known as radar pickets, suffered the full fury of the divine wind.
If you were doing picket duty as far as around an engagement that was happening, then of course you were almost anticipating any given minute that you're going to pick up somebody trying to come in, and you knew that you were very susceptible to attack at any time, either by surface or by air, maybe by both.
When we were assigned to a picket station, most of us sat down and wrote our last letter.
Attacking in groups of 2 or 3 planes, the kamikazes overwhelmed the anti-aircraft guns of the destroyers.
We had 5-inch 38s, 40 millimeters, and 20 millimeters. And all of the gun crews were busy from all directions because they would try to come in 3 planes at a time on us from 3 different directions.
On April 6, 1945, the destroyer Calhoun, with Swede Jensen at the helm, was hit and sunk by 5 kamikaze aircraft.
There isn't any way to describe it as far as what's happening, other than the fact that it was like a well-shot movie, and you looking at it as opposed to being there, and you just took all of the action in and seeing what's happening and said, wait a minute, I'm in the center of this. I'm not sitting in a theater seat watching it. It's frightening, but not at that particular time.
At the end of the 82-day battle, 164 ships had been either sunk or damaged, causing 10,000 naval casualties. Of the 150 destroyers that took part in the fight, 15 lay at the bottom of the surrounding seas. Okinawa was not only the last major naval engagement of the war, but also its most costly.
Destroyers will continue in a moment here on A&E.
The Korean conflict found World War II destroyers back in action, providing shore bombardment, rescue, and escort duties. Although the Korean War was fought with destroyers using conventional weapons, in the years that followed it became apparent they would have to be equipped with countermeasures against newly evolving technologies.
Destroyers continue to have an important anti-air role, but now aircraft are flying much faster, they're jet-propelled, and they're being armed with missiles that permit them to stand off 10, 20, 30 miles from a convoy or a carrier and attack with an air-to-surface missile. So beginning in the 1950s, we arm our destroyers with surface-to-air missiles, with anti-aircraft missiles.
We must face total communist aggression, with total dedication to defend the frontiers of freedom, physically and ideologically.
As the Cold War escalated, the submarine played a key role in the naval nuclear arsenal. To help destroyers detect and engage submarines at greater distances, it would be necessary to develop new tactics in anti-submarine warfare.
I would say the two major advances in destroyer systems or weapons were, one, the helicopter, which could carry a sonar or a torpedo, or both in the later helicopters, many miles from the surface ship, and second, the anti-aircraft missile.
At first, the Navy used unmanned, remotely controlled helicopters launched from the deck of a destroyer. Later, destroyers could support manned helicopters that could fly off the deck and use dipping sonar and airborne torpedoes to find and stop subs at much greater distances from the destroyer. In spite of its newest technology, the Vietnam War found the destroyer to be still useful as a floating gun platform. Sitting in relative safety offshore, its 5-inch guns could hurl shells inland with deadly accuracy. Until the early 70s, much of the U.S. destroyer fleet consisted of war-built Gearing and Sumner-class ships. The first of the Spruance-class destroyers were commissioned in 1975, and now the Navy is taking delivery of the newest in destroyer development.
Today, we celebrate a birth, a new addition to the United States Navy, a new addition to the United States Atlantic Fleet, the guided missile destroyer USS Arleigh Burke. She is revolutionary, the first destroyer of the 21st century.
The Arleigh Burke-class destroyers are wider with improved hydrodynamics to produce a weapons platform that is stable at any speed. These ships are also equipped with the Aegis system of computerized sensors.
The Aegis system is a remarkable anti-aircraft system. It's a combination of these fixed phased array radars and a combat control system, which today is the most effective anti-air system in the world, land or sea-based.
With its speed, firepower, and ability to engage numerous types of threats, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyers continue the tradition of the hundreds of destroyers that have preceded them.
Periodically, pundits say it's going to be the submarine in the future. We won't need surface ships, they're too vulnerable. But as long as we're going to use the seas to move goods, to move people, to move troops, we're going to need surface warships. As long as we have surface warships, the destroyer will be the most important one.
Admiral Chester W. Nimitz, in praising the destroyer's importance, said, Not even the carrier or the submarine has such an assured place in future navies. These fast, sleek, and powerful greyhounds of the sea have won a permanent berth in the history of warfare, as well as a prominent position in the fleet as it sails into the 21st century.
Tomorrow, it was an event that took police nearly 72 hours to contain. Bill Curtis goes into the heart of the L.A. riots on investigative reports. Now, Arlene Sorkin hosts A&E's An Evening at the Improv next.